Hi, how are you? Victoria Doherty here, and this is Love It with First Right. Welcome. I am historically a historical thriller writer who is endeavoring to write an epic, sort of romantic series. And and this vlog, chronicles, that endeavor, but it also chronicles writing a novel, writing a series, kind of just the storytelling process, and what as readers and writers makes us fall in love with the story and really get invested in characters to a point where sometimes they can feel like family. um, Today, I want to talk about explicit violence. Um, when it crosses the line into gratuitous violence. And I think, we can apply this to sex as well, quite easily, because I think that sex and violence are sort of flip side of the same coin when writing, because they are both important, they are both tantalizing, and they can both go too far, and take a reader out of the story. And that, I think, as writers, is what we absolutely do not want to do. It takes a really deft hand to be gratuitous with violence and still keep the reader, fixed in with the characters. As a filmmaker, I think Quentin Tarantino is just brilliant at this, because he trades in gratuitous violence. I mean, it is one of his benchmarks. It's what he does, I think, in just about every single one of his films, and yet somehow he manages to do it with tremendous finesse, and he makes it part of the fun, and he makes it part of the characters, and he is such a good writer that he keeps us engaged in the story. It's rare. I want to read you something, just to give you an idea of how thin that line can be and how difficult it can be to walk that line. I wrote uh, a series of Cold War noir, or not a series. I wrote a book of Cold War noir short stories that actually ended up being the basis for a novel that I wrote, because I love the characters so much. I had to continue their story. But I want to read to you two reviews that I took off the several dozen that it has on Amazon. I don't know either of these reviewers, by the way. I chose them because it gives you an idea of how different a reader's experience can be, because we are going to be talking about sort of staying true to what we think the story needs, but without, taking a reader out of the story, without repelling a reader. So here is one review, and this is for Welcome to the Hotel Yalta, which actually you can download for free on Amazon if you want a digital copy. Um, a lovely group of stories revolving around Eastern Europe and Russia. Um, all during the Cold War. It could be described as a trail of assassins following one another through a series of jobs, all of which fall out in an endless pattern of meaningless death. It is noir in the truest sense, sublime. Okay, that's Amazon reviewer number one. And this review came almost right after it, also from someone I don't know. Sex scenes with no purpose and gratuitous murder. Maybe I just don't like this genre. I just don't have 5 more words for this. Okay, that's that's uh, that's quite a different response from two readers who certainly read the summary before downloading the book, and were both intrigued enough to want to read it, and yet had a very, very different experience. I think it was I may have the date wrong, but I think it was in 1964 when Supreme Court Justice Potter Stewart said he can't really describe obscenity, but he knows it when he sees it. It was obviously for a case before the Supreme Court that was about obscenity, and that's also been said of porn. I'll know it when I see it. The difference between art, for instance, and porn, between using the human body and using sex as an artistic expression, and using it gratuitously. And this is what we are faced with when writing scenes of explicit violence. Now, I say this because I am writing this romantic series, but it is very much in my vein. I do write about violence. I do write about death. I do write about murder. I do write about war. And I think that these are very important things to see with a cold eye and to look at head on. And yet I'm also aware of how careful I need to be so as not to cross that line. I don't like crossing the line in a sex scene or in a violent scene. Well, depending on the genre. If you're writing erotica, that's something different. If you're writing a genre that demands violence, I think that's also a bit different. But that is not what I'm doing in this romantic series. In fact, I would also like it to appeal to older young adult readers as well as um, adult readers. So I need to be careful. And yet, um, there is a destruction of a civilization that goes on in my story. And it is something that I have based, at least in part, on real events such as the rape of Nanking, which was a horrific event in the Second World War, that a regiment of Japanese soldiers perpetrated on the city of Nanking in China. And it was uh, such such a violent and terrible event. I mean, infants were boiled in oil. Women were raped to death often. I mean, it was common in this terrible instance. Um, in when I was reading a nonfiction book about the rape of Nanking, there was even one part where they were describing this little girl who had been raped to death, and her body was unrecognizable. She just looked like meat. Um, Now, these are the very real horrors of war and the breakdown of discipline. And it is something that I'm addressing in my story. And yet, I want to be careful because I don't want to, first of all, I don't want to focus on this. And yet, at the same time, I want it to have an impact. I want the reader to not be able to look away. And that is hard because when you're writing terribly violent scenes, um, that is an opportunity for a reader to look away. I know I look away when I'm watching, really awful, horrifically violent movies. I think I do also look away when I'm reading about violence sometimes if I feel like it has just taken me to a place where I have to put the book down, and that is something that I absolutely do not want in my story. Not in this story. I will take it in my book, my short stories of noir, the reviews that I read you, because noir can take it, and I think a reader who is looking for noir. Noir is depressing. Noir characters, you know, they go through some pretty serious events, and they tend to do so with a shrug. These are really jaded characters, typically in noir, which is why I could get away with it, and why the reviewer who said there was no purpose in gratuitous murder, maybe I just don't like this genre. She's right. She probably doesn't like that genre. I'm okay with that review. If I'd gotten several reviews that said this was just gratuitous, I didn't like it, it was depressing. Thankfully, I didn't. So I was able to stand by that. But what I'm doing now is a lot trickier, and so I am really having to read and reread and re-edit everything that I write. And the way that I'm doing it is, first of all, I'm writing the scene with all the gore and the violence in it first off, and then I'm going back and trimming it and giving it artistic merit, hopefully, taking out what is gratuitous and leaving what is powerful, what is impactful, what brings meaning to the story and helps us understand what these characters are going through, which is absolutely imperative for the stories that I will be writing later in this series. I had to start big. I had to start with this very cataclysmic event, but I also have to be very, very careful, and I think we all do. I would love to hear from readers about what gratuitous violence means to you. What goes too far? What doesn't go far enough? What um, what is it that draws you in about a violent scene, maybe a war scene or a scene between two people? And what is it that repels you? That would really mean a lot to me if you'd like to either reach out to me personally or in the comments. Um, but other than that, this is what I am struggling with this week, and what I'm really endeavoring to make right. And I look forward to sharing it with you when it's done, to see if I've done it right. Also, if you would like to read excerpts of this series or of other fiction that I have or essays, please visit me on Patreon. Victoria Doherty on Patreon. It would be great to see you there because I really try to make it special for y'all. Bye.